I'm your host, Dr. Katie Mayer from Let's Get You Into Vet School Mentorship and Getting In newsletter. I'm talking to y'all today about writing your vet school application personal statements and essays. To help you, I'll be interviewing Brenna. She's my all-time favorite editor and a mom-to-be. She edited my book, which is available on Amazon, and I'll link in the notes below. And now she helps me edit my mentorship students' essays. Brenna has been a top-rated freelance writer on Upwork for almost 7 years and has worked with clients and companies all over the world, from successful startups and media outlets to ghostwriting projects. Her niche is helping people find their voice and clarify their ideas using the power of storytelling. She's written multiple books, speeches, essays, and articles for a diverse range of clients, many of whom she's maintained a long-term partnership with. In addition to her work with clients, she also writes a weekly newsletter, that is awesome, fueled with her own original essays and research on how to find purpose and live a more meaningful and beautiful life. Brenna knows how to make each of my students' essays really shine, and she is very good at revealing their passions and their personalities, and I wanted to share her knowledge with y'all today. Hi, Brenna.
Hi, Katie. I'm so excited to be here, especially being one of the first guests on your podcast. It's a great honor. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for joining. Okay, we'll jump right in. The dreaded white page. How do you get past it?
Yes. So it's kind of a mind hack. Basically, you don't think about it like you have to start writing the actual essay. What I do, and this is both for when I'm doing work for clients, but also if I'm just writing for myself, for my own projects, I start with notes. I start with ideas, and I might just start spitballing. And what's really interesting is that when you look back on your notes and your ramblings, you might realize, oh, some of this is actually more coherent than I thought it would be. And you can actually use some of it as part of your actual draft as you get started. Again, that's why I say it's a mind hack, because you don't want to think, if you're telling your brain, oh, I have to write it for real, I have to do a really good job. I personally believe that's where the block comes in. So what you do is you just liberate yourself and you liberate your mind by saying, I don't need to write the real thing right now. I just need to start writing notes. I just need to start writing ideas. And then even if those notes and ideas are pretty messy still, you won't have a blank page. So either way, it's a win-win.
I completely agree. Gets the juices flowing and take the pressure off.
Exactly. Yep.
I usually tell my students, like, when you think of a story that really struck a chord with you, whether it was like this aha moment or just a really cool thing you learned from a veterinarian, pull over on the side of the road, dictate it into your phone, jot down like 3 sentences in your brain. Remember a story about X, Y, and Z. It made me feel like this. And just jot these things down when you have them in your brain, because later on you'll come back and you'll be like, okay, I got to sit down and write my essay with my cup of coffee. And instead of feeling all that pressure, you go to your notes, like you said, and find the little story or a little something that sparked your memory initially, and maybe that can get you going.
Exactly. And quick side note, I mean, everybody has their own way of note keeping, but I have a cloud-backed digital place where I store my notes. Whenever I'm stuck for something, I just go by category of what I need the help with. And I find stuff. I have ideas, links, quotes, you name it. That's what helps me just stay on top of my schedule with things I need to do. So yeah, I am all about note keeping. I totally agree.
I love it. We'll have to link that at the bottom. That kind of leads us into the whole personal statement. It can be very daunting to try to fill a page or 3,000 characters with like your whole life and passion. If you feel like you have to fit in your whole life story or start from the beginning of your life, and it's not really a story of your life. So what kind of advice do you give people specifically about their personal statement of why they want to be a vet without a chronological history of their whole life?
This is another one where I would say the advice is a little bit counterintuitive. What I notice that a lot of applicants do that is understandable is they don't want to go over. So they're already trying to edit in their minds before they start writing their statement. However, I think the best stuff doesn't come out that way. They're thinking too hard. I think what's better is to, again, just start rambling. And it might be chronological. It doesn't have to be the for real final version of your essay. You're just writing down everything. I can say from my experience, the best stuff doesn't come up first. It comes up again, while you're just spitballing, thinking. And what's interesting, and I think you've noticed this too, Katie, is the best stuff that you and I find, our applicants are like, oh, really? You think I should talk about that? Okay. A lot of times it's not even the thing you think at first is going to be special and important, but it is. To try to summarize to answer your question, I would say it's everything you can think of. It doesn't matter how long it is, because editing is everything. And you go back and then you pick out, okay, what here is the most interesting, the most relevant, and maybe makes me stand out. So it's a process of going from something big and longer, I should say, to then you can fit it into the word count. And people might think, oh, that sounds like it takes a lot of time. I would say, no, that's actually the shorter way to do it, because if you have something long, you have lots to cut back and then you're good. You're close to home. If you start out trying to fit that word limit, what happens is you have to keep changing it over and over again because, oh, I didn't get this other thing in, or this I need to take out, and you're going to do a million iterations. I would just say, don't even think about the character count or the word limit in the beginning, and you'll actually get it done faster that way.
I think you're absolutely right. And I didn't realize it until we started editing essays. And you're right. It was like, well, I don't have enough room to keep this paragraph because I really want this conclusion. And we're saying,
Yeah.
tell us more about this story because it's colorful and it describes your personality. And then there's no room because they're just trying to edit before it even began. I like that.
Yep.
Just lump everything out and take a couple of days off, possibly send it to someone else that has like a decent view of essay writing or reading. Honestly, anyone that's well read, just see what grabs their attention and ask them to highlight the stories that grab their attention. And then you can kind of expound on like a theme or tie it back together by the end of the essay with
Yes.
that story or something like that. But just to dump everything out, not try to organize it too much, not necessarily think about how short it needs to be or how long it needs to be. They're kind of shooting themselves in the foot before it
Yes. Yes.
begins.
Yes. Here's just another kind of side note since we're talking about personal essays. In my opinion, some of the best and most original personal essays actually start out with a story. And then they kind of work back from there. Like, here's how I got to the point. Or, it was the middle of July and this mama horse was just giving birth and we didn't know what was wrong with her. And we figured out it was this and that's how we saved her life. And then they kind of jump backwards and say, yeah, and this is how I got to the point of being able to do this and say, I was able to save this animal's life, or I was in this amazing situation and I had this opportunity because of whatever. And then you can kind of talk about your experience and all of that. But yeah, I think what I find is natural for people to do is they want to be chronological. They're like, okay, so once upon a time, I brought a kitten home, and that's how I started my love of wanting to be a vet or whatever. And that's talk like that, storytelling wise. We keep things in chronological order, but you can actually make a personal essay really strong by starting out with a story that's maybe more recent, and then you jump back and you kind of follow up. But starting in the middle of a really dramatic story is great for getting attention, and most people don't do that. And so I'm not saying every applicant should, but I do think it's a really powerful approach that you should at least consider.
I completely agree. Okay, so in general, most of these students have to write, personal statement. They have an optional explanation statement where they can explain like a semester that's gone sour or like a hard time they had with this particular teacher or whatever it might be. And that's optional. And
Yeah.
then they have supplemental essays as well for each school that they apply to. And some of those usually include something like, tell me something non-veterinary related. And people get stuck there because they find their identity in veterinary medicine at such a young age. They're kind of like, I don't have good stories about myself that don't have animals in them, And especially people whose hobby includes something to do with animals, whether it's 4-H or like riding horses or showing horses and all that stuff. Do you have any advice for anyone that's struggling in that area?
It's really helpful, in my opinion, to talk to trusted friends, family, colleagues, and say, hey, obviously my central passion is animals, but what other things do you think I'm good at? Or when you think of the kind of person I am, what other things come to your mind? because again, people see you differently from how you see yourself. And like you said, Katie, these students, these applicants might have tunnel vision, especially when they're doing the application, because when they're doing these applications for vet school, they're in that mode of, oh, I must show how relevant and how eligible I am for vet school. And so it's almost kind of counterintuitive or weird maybe to get a prompt that says, okay, we don't want you to talk about animal things right now. You're not ready for that. So talk to somebody else who, of course, you trust and respect and see what they might say. It'll probably be something that you would have thought was maybe small or not important, but that other person doesn't. For example, it might be you're really good with people too. You are a great friend. You have lots of friends, including me. You're a great communicator. And you
Hmm.
know what? That's very relevant because if you're in vet school, you're going to be working with people, not just animals.
Yep.
So if you're trying to think of answers on your own, I should say whether or not you're having somebody help you brainstorm, don't take anything for granted. I guess that's something I would say, like in a nutshell. Don't take anything for granted. The thing that you might think was insignificant or common or whatever, there's actually a good chance it's actually very relevant. And you just need to be a little more creative. And you just want to think about it in the context of how would this help me as a vet? And I bet you anything you will find a connection. But definitely people you trust and respect can be very helpful with that.
I love that tip. I think that's so applicable, so true. And you're always surprised with what people say. I remember filling
Yeah.
out a quiz like before I got married, and I was it was like, what's one thing you respect about your future spouse or something? And what I heard was something I never would have ever imagined or noticed or anything. It was like a like, oh, and it stuck with me like 15 years later. I'm like, okay, that was important.
Yeah, usually it's a pleasant surprise.
For any kind of essay writing, top 3 tips. Like, what are the main things that you end up telling our students? If you find a theme, like a common thing that you oftentimes correct or recommend.
Sure. I might reiterate some things we've already mentioned, but storytelling slash visuals is huge. Humans love stories, they love drama, and admins in vet school are no different. They're humans just like you and me. And trust me, they're going through this giant stash of applicants who most of them are probably very great people, very qualified, but they're still human. And if every essay starts out the same and says, I believe in hard work and I have worked hard to come to this point in my life, I mean, their eyes are going to start glazing over.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to be a little funny, be a little surprised. I'm not saying like shocking or don't be too weird, but don't be afraid to, again, start off with a story or start off with like kind of a gotcha thing, like, okay, now that I have your attention, you know, open with some kind of interesting visual or something or a joke or whatever it is, then you come across as human, which is kind of related. So this is maybe another related point is like human connection, like writing, even though it's not face to face talking, it's still a form of human connection.
Mhm.
So just keep that in mind. What I notice with our applicants, again, they are really smart, qualified people, is they seem to be just very focused on it from the point of, I need to check a bunch of check boxes.
Mhm.
And I mean, yeah, to a point, you do, there are requirements, and that's why you're doing this whole application thing. But this is also a chance to connect and resonate. So my advice is look for opportunities to connect, make it fun, use stories, think about what would make you enjoy reading somebody else's essay, and then do that thing. And don't be afraid to kind of think outside the box. And then the other thing I would say too is just, again, don't be afraid to write a lot or write stuff that you're not even sure about. You can always edit it later. Editing is huge. And what breaks my heart are the applicants who are really good and they're actually really good writers, but they literally wait till the last day and they're like, here's my stuff. And I'm like, you're a great writer. This would be like amazing if we just had like even 3 more days to, because editing is huge. Like, and I can say this for myself, because even though I write professionally and I do my own writing in addition to writing for other people, my first draft is never going to be the final one. I always have to go back and edit. And I've had other people and other editors help me and point out all kinds of problems that I've had to fix that I didn't see. So it doesn't even matter how good you are as a writer, you still need those fresh eyes. So yeah, editing, storytelling, human connection. I'm always coming back to those things.
I completely agree. And just to give our listeners kind of an idea of like examples, we have edited essays together that started with something like, I had all this mud on my boots and it was 5 o'clock in the morning. She's treating this horse. But it was the descriptive first sentence that I remember a year later after reading countless essays and YouTube.
Oh, yes.
And then another that we did that we were both struck by was an applicant who was working as a vet tech, as a lot of our applicants are. And she pretty much told the story of how she communicated a diagnosis to a very worried owner who did not understand the doctor's description, testing, diagnosis, treatment plan. She was able to kind of talk her off of a ledge, this very upset client about her pet. So it showed empathy. It was a simple thing that probably every single person listening has done for their vet or been on the other side of, and a really good communicating vet did a good job of that. And then this applicant absorbed it. But it was a very simple story. It wasn't some crazy wild diagnosis that no one's ever heard of. They're going to write a paper about. It was like thyroid disease. But she displayed empathy with the owner. She displayed patience. She took her time and explained it to her. And she really showed really good communication skills, which is clearly important in this story and as a vet. That stuck with both of us. I think you can use that in your personal statement, but you can also use that in some of these essays that ask you, like, what is the best skill or virtue that you have besides study skills, et cetera, that will make you a good vet? And so you can use a story to show that virtue. And you don't have to, but I think that's a good spot to use a story like that. Would you agree?
Not only do I agree, I would say use stories wherever you can.
Mhm.
And again, this is something I see applicants being shy with. They see the prompt and they're like, okay, answer the prompt. And they're trying to keep it really short. And I'm like, if you can tell a story even in 2 sentences and be within the limit, of course, you don't want to go over the limit, but do that because again, the reviewer, who again, like they're human at the end of the day, and human brains are all essentially the same. We remember stories, we remember visuals. There's the cliche in writing, but it's cliche for a reason, and it's show, don't tell. And essentially, it's if you can use a visual of some kind rather than simply say, I am a caring, compassionate person because I know that that is important and therefore I do my very best with all my clients. Humans are going to remember the story, like you said, Katie. That's such a good example, that story, because I remember it too. They're going to remember the story of the vet tech who's comforting this crying, sad pet owner. They're going to remember that. They're not going to remember the very monotone, bland sentence that reads, I am a caring, compassionate person because I know how important it is to be caring, compassionate. Again, don't take it like the checkbox too literally. Don't just be regurgitating what you think you need to say. Like, make it into a story and show how you actually qualify, show your actual experience and how you can showcase your talents, your abilities, the things they're asking you about.
Exactly. It's all about showcasing little parts of
Yeah,
yourself in little glimpses, and you can schedule that throughout your application. It doesn't all have to be in the personal statement.
exactly. Yeah.
Lastly, do you have any life advice? Do you have anything new in your life? Anything interesting?
As you mentioned, Katie, I do have a newsletter.
That's right. We're going to link it at the bottom.
Yeah, for sure. It's not related to vet school. It is related to
Very
life in general, though.
applicable.
It's kind of, yeah, very relevant to life, like a lot of life lessons, kind of like philosophy meets psychology. So it's been great for me as far as improving my own skills as a writer to have a personal project that I do. So some of our applicants may love writing, some of them may not. But I mean, I can tell you that if you find something you're passionate about and you write about that thing, it'll definitely sharpen your writing skills. So whether you journal, whatever it is that you do, I love helping people write. But I also find it's very important to write for myself. It helps me take my own writing more seriously, if that makes sense, because
Mhm.
it's like, okay, obviously I'm showing up for these other people who need me, but I'm going to show up for myself. And even if there's nobody else holding me accountable, I'm going to do it for myself. I'm going to have my own project and I love it. And I even hire artists from Fiverr. So I can
Nice.
have
I
original
noticed the
artwork.
artwork. Yes, that is
Yeah,
so
it's
cool.
commissioned artwork. I try to not use stock images because,
Right.
I mean, some stock images are really nice, but I really believe in just putting personal touch on things. And this, I would say, is loosely connected to what we've said about, essays in vet school too. Like the world is just saturated with so much of the same, everybody kind of doing the same thing, repeating each other, imitating each other. People just are kind of scared to like go outside the lines or they don't want to take the extra work. So
Right.
something I've committed to doing with my newsletter, and hopefully anybody who checks it out will see this, and you be honest with me too, Katie, but I try to go the extra mile. Like that's why I hire artists to create artwork for me instead of just taking random stock images. And I had a friend help me design my own site and customize it so it's not just like a generic
Wonderful.
template that you could see with a lot of sites. And
Right.
so I just do those little extra things that shows I'm taking myself and my ideas really seriously, and I want to make this a really amazing experience for my readers. And so, yeah, I guess go the extra mile and you'll feel better about yourself. You'll take pride in your work.
That's
So
great
I
advice.
do that with my newsletter, but yeah, whether you're an applicant for vet school or whatever it is you do, just go that extra mile. It might sound counterintuitive, like I'm telling you to do more work, but I'm saying, yes, do more work, but you're going to actually take pride in your work and you're going to love it even more. And you're going to want to keep going. You need that motivation to keep going. And that's what kind of motivates you is working hard. And I've already had like friends and people who read the newsletter tell me that they notice the work I do and they appreciate it. That's what keeps me going.
It's all about happiness. And I think one of the things that it has brought you is like a little bit of balance. It sounds like, especially since you work on other people's things a lot. And so to make something for yourself is so important. And that is the same thing these students are doing. They spend so much time, it feels like they're furthering other people's businesses and working for other vets. And they're not always chasing their own dream. And a lot of my students are second occupation. They have families or they have a totally different career. They've taken a couple years off of school after they graduate. And so they are also looking for a work-life balance. And I know it's an overused term, but I think
So
writing
true, though.
so important and it can help anyone. You don't have to be a good writer. You can just write and write and write and write. You don't have to use a period. You can just continuously write every morning. It kind of unlocks something in your brain. But I also think that your newsletter is a little bit of like therapy. And I recommend everyone sign up because, there's a lot online and there's a lot being shoved at us all the time about how to be happy. Let's be happy. 1, 2, 3. Everybody be happy. You have to be happy. You have to have 1, 2, 3 things and you have to have to accomplish this and then you'll be happy. And it's not that. It's all about the journey.
Yeah, the dreaded trinity for me is tips, tricks, and hacks. Those three words. Like that makes sense for something technical, but when it comes to like your life purpose, I don't believe it can be boiled down to tips, tricks, and hacks. And like
Right. To be happy.
that's very
Absolutely
much not
not.
my brand.
Absolutely not. That is probably my brand because I am trying to use little tips and tricks to get people in.
Which makes total sense because yeah, what you're doing is a much more concrete, tangible thing.
I feel
But
like
that
it,
thank you. That's a
but
huge compliment that it feels like therapy because there are so many newsletters out there that yeah, the goal with mine is I want it to be a pick me up for the readers. Like,
mhm,
here's some things to think about, here's some nice visuals to look at.
right.
Hopefully you feel like calmer after this
Oh
instead of
yeah.
feeling like you have more things you need to do.
Oh, definitely not. After I read it for that whole week, it was like things started clicking. Like I realized there was a term that you used for like the small little wins that give you a tiny little high after you get it done, or I forgot the term you used. I noticed like, oh, those are the little things like I feel really good. Like I nailed this case, perfect diagnosis, owner calls me back, treatment worked. That's a little win. And you get like a little high, like a little bit of happiness from it. but
Hmm.
it doesn't last forever because the next case is a dumpster fire. So it's like you can't rely
Yep.
on being a perfect doctor or being a perfect salesman or whatever you are to give you happiness in life. That's the other kind of happiness that you talked about. So I really encourage our listeners to sign up because it brought me a lot of like clarity and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed this week's newsletter as well, but it was that first one that really taught me a lot. I took my time and tried to like identify with it, and it did. It clicked, and it still is clicking.
I'm so glad that it's having the effect I've been hoping it has.
Oh, yeah. And the writing is
Yeah.
clear, and like the sentences are short. And that's a tip for my listeners. If you feel like you have to write so professionally and these long sentences with big words and lots of adjectives, and you don't. Sometimes these short sentences that are edited
Definitely
down,
not.
they
Yeah.
come across stronger. And so a lot of what you do is add paragraphs to our students. Sometimes they'll mention like, I don't want to add a paragraph because I don't want to lose two characters, but it packs such a punch. When you look at a piece of paper with
Yeah.
a line or physical and you see just this huge blob of words, it's a turn
Yeah.
off and it makes my eyes glaze over immediately. But to break it into
Yeah.
paragraphs, it's going to be worth it. You can find one word to delete from your statement to give up and pack that punch. And same thing with your sentences. You know, sometimes we break one sentence into three and then we'll like delete one of those. So shorter sentences, less words, and kind of write like you talk and less textbook. I think sometimes people write like a textbook and it's harder to read it.
It is harder. And they think, I need to be formal because this is a formal application. And again, they're forgetting that the reviewer on the other end, even if they're a very smart, credentialed person, they're still a person and they're not enjoying. I mean, I don't know that anybody actually enjoys the way textbooks are written. It's just sometimes you have to read more techie writing to get certain information, right? And so why would you make your application that way if it doesn't have to be? You don't need to be as formal as you think. That's okay if you're just an English class or, yeah,
Yeah.
for vet school, you want to make this special. What I'm saying, and I think we're both saying, is it's not being extra impressive or doing anything super fancy or slaving over it for hours and hours. It's have a lot more narrative in it. Just let it flow from you. And then you look at it, tweak it a little bit, and it'll be great. But yeah,
Yeah.
don't overthink it. Make it the way you talk because then it'll sound sincere, it'll sound interesting. And then I just want to quickly tack onto that. I mean, most people have a nice personality. Sure that comes through because sometimes when I read certain applications, it sounds very robotic. It sounds a little cold even. And everybody has a different personality. I get it, but these reviewers, they want to know that you're a caring, compassionate person or that you're a relatable person, that you are a person. So again, don't be afraid to insert a little humor, be a little conversational. And, you know, Katie and I, when we work with you, we show you more specifically how to do that. And you might wonder, oh, how exactly do I do that? But don't be too formal because when you're really formal, you can end up sounding like you're just kind of diffident, kind of like you don't have much of a personality. Do you even care about vet school? Do you even care about what you're doing? You know, you want like the passion to come through for sure.
And for sure, avoid anything that just overall sounds negative. It's okay to tell like a sad story, a heartbreaking story. It's okay to show that you struggled with the death of a family member or this or that. You don't want it to sound really like an excuse, of course, when you mention stuff like this. But you can say, although this was like the toughest part of my life, I am proud for picking myself up, dusting myself off, and moving forward. And it wasn't easy because now I'm dealing with maybe you don't want to list more things, but just keep it positive. Like there have been a few essays that we've read that were like, this is
Yes.
a little bit negative. I feel like I'm getting screamed at. Some of these people are admin, and some of these people reading your essays are vets. And oftentimes it's several people. And then they might give you a 0 to 10 score. And then those three people with their three scores get averaged together, and that's what you get for your portion of the essay. So there's different people reading your essay. It's not like you're gonna get a gamble and randomly get a vet or gamble and get the head of admissions. You kind of want
Hmm.
something that generally pleases most people, and you want it to be upbeat and not just negative. So just make sure your overall tone is positive.
Absolutely. Because if you think about it, what kind of a applicant do vet schools want? They want someone resilient, right? Ideally, I would think somebody optimistic, somebody who can try to see the positives in things and not diminish things that are hard. But because, being a vet is hard. And how can you make it easier for your pet owners, your patients, by being a loving, positive person and just bringing that positive energy to what you do? And again, you can do this with your own personality. It's not
Mhm.
like everybody has to be like a Pollyanna, but just you've got to have an overall positive, resilient work ethic. And, this would go beyond the scope of this conversation, Katie, but maybe you'll talk about in the future. But I guess my 2 cents is if you don't feel positive or if you really struggle with that, maybe like try to unpack that first before you
Right.
just try to like finish cramming your application because like vet school is not a walk in the park, obviously.
Right.
So if
Neither.
you do feel like, hey, I'm struggling to be a positive person or I'm struggling to see like what's good about my experiences, or I just am having self-esteem issues with my application, or I feel like I'm not where I should be in my life, you and I, as editors, we can help a little bit with that. We can kind of help people try to see in a better perspective. But if you're like really struggling with that, like go figure that out
Now is the time to go
first,
and
because that's
figure.
really, really important,
Oh, yeah. And that comes across. People that, I mean, not everyone is perfectly confident,
Yeah.
especially when you feel like you're just throwing all your info into the internet and it looks like everybody else is like, no one, I don't think it really truly feels confident. But if you're feeling any of the things that Brenna said, I definitely agree. Go unpack that with someone who is more qualified than us, because here and there we will pick up, even if it's in just one of your smaller essays or your explanation statement, where it seems like you're not sure this is what you want to do, negative, you've
Hmm.
been burned by something in the past and you're really holding on to it and it feels like resentful and bitter. Like those things
Hmm.
come across and they make me like, ooh, where this might have been like a pretty average or above average essay or just an entire application. And now instead of giving you an 8 out of 10, I'm going to give you like a 6.5 out of 10 because it just doesn't feel right. It's all because of this one teacher who gave you a D and it's not. So if you end up using,
Right.
you know, you have to man up, for lack of a
Yeah,
better term, because like you said, vet school is not easy. And
totally.
I always say the hardest part is getting in because that's what my dad told me. And he's right, because they want you in there. They want you to stay in. So they don't know you when you're
Yeah,
applying. Once you're in, they want you to stay in because it's very expensive for them to keep you for a fifth year rather than four. So anyway, the
right.
point is, even if you use your explanation statement, which is optional, again, a lot of people use to explain like their bad semester, and it might be because of this teacher, it might be because your grandma died or whatever it was. You might want to think about describing it like shortly, not going into incredible detail, but then
Hmm.
also saying something about how you rose above it, what you learned from it, how it's going to make you a better vet. Because you're going to be dealing with all of those things when you're a vet, and you're also going to be dealing with your own life and death and kids and families and houses and mortgages and insurance. You're going to be dealing with all the things that you're dealing with now, and hopefully you don't go through a horrible time like that again. But you do want to not harp on it. You don't want to seem like you're blaming anyone else for your own explanation statement, but you also just kind of want to make somewhat of a positive spin, or at least like, I learned a lot from this. I never want to go through it again, but I retook that class and I got an A, or whatever it might be. You can make it somewhat positive. You just don't want to seem bitter because that will stick with the reader.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with the distinction that you made earlier. If you feel a little bit underconfident or overwhelmed going into it, that's okay. Like that's not what we're talking about. It's
Yeah.
totally fine if you come into it and you're like, oh, I want to think I'm special, but I'm not sure how. I feel like the competition is so hard. That's what we can help you with. That's totally normal. But if we're both trying to help you, or if other people are trying to help you, and you still are like feeling dark feelings, maybe for lack of a better word, you're struggling to see things in a positive way, or you feel like past experiences, or you're
Really.
stuck in a feedback loop or something because of experiences you've had previously, yeah, then that's when I would say go get other kinds of help first, or like just really try to center and figure what's going on before you keep pushing yourself with vet school, because it's never too late to come back if you need to take a little time. It's better to take care of yourself first.
100%.
Yeah.
And these days, vet schools are starting to accept people in January, in May and June, as well as in September. So 6 months in the long run is nothing if it clarifies your mind.
Yeah. If that is the time you need to, whatever it is you need to do to take care of your mental health, that is so, so important because, yeah, happy, well-adjusted vets will, make for much happier patients and owners and everybody else. Take
Was
care of yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. And not everybody comes from the same place. Some people really do have harder.
Yeah, people have
Yeah,
harder
go for it. Yeah.
journeys than others, and you can't resent someone else for having an easier
Yeah.
journey. It's also just not easy sometimes for some, and of course, hard for others. But that did bring up one other thing that I think has struck a chord with some of my students in the past, and that is that vet students, most of us have wanted to do this our whole lives. And then it's a hard route. So whenever someone asks you what you're majoring in, it's like you almost don't want to tell them because you're going to hear, oh, it's so hard to get into vet school, yada, 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 all this stuff. It just makes it feel like it's your whole identity, but it's not your whole identity. And some of my students have responded to me saying, I needed to hear that. No one's ever told me that because I've felt this since I was so young. And then being in college, it's all about your path and your classes. And this is hard. And oh, she's studying this really hard class. And so it just makes it feel like it's your whole being, and it's not. And that's one of the great things about what you've done, like pushing yourself to take even more of your time to write and put it out there in the world, is because that's like an expression of you. And so I always, of course, like recommend people write in the morning, even if it's not about your essays, because sometimes that gets things flowing and that gets things off your chest. And then it gets these worries down on paper. When you look at them, you're like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. And then just remember that if you get a C in a class or whatever you get, it's just a class. And there are lots of positive things going on in your world, and you never know where your path is going to take you. It may lead you in a very circuitous route to vet school. It may lead you directly to vet school. It may lead you somewhere totally different. So just don't beat yourself up about being perfect, and don't feel like a failure or a rejection letter from a vet school is a rejection of you. It's a rejection of your application. It might be because everybody that year had 3.9s and you had a 3.4. It's not about you, it's about your application. And you can do things to better that, but you're not being rejected, and your entire being is not a pre-vet student.
Absolutely. And just quick side note, everybody loves an underdog too. So some of my favorite stories are the ones where it is their second round. We have had some really good applicants where it's like, this is my second time or whatever. And what's cool is they take that extra time, the extra year or 2 years or however long, to do even more amazing things. So they actually have more rich experience than some of the ones who get in right away. And you kind of were saying this already, Katie, in so many words, but there's not just one way to get into vet school or to go to vet school. There's different ways and different timelines. And in the great scheme of things, what does it matter? If you really, really want it, it's totally possible. I love what we do together. And I love what you're doing, Katie. You've actually created like a program, a course, plus the amazing free resources to kind of help people and kind of hold their hand, because I'm sure it's lonely and overwhelming, but I love your positive energy. And yeah, what I get from working with you is like, this can be done. It's not too late. There's more than one way. And let's be creative. Everybody's different. But yeah, if you want it badly enough, you can make it happen with help from other people, which
Yeah,
is kind of where we come in. It's hopefully a little easier and a little more enjoyable.
I completely agree. Not every path is the same, and that's what makes us different, and that's what you should be writing about. Brenna, I want to really thank you so, so much for your time. You're so generous with your time. You're so generous with your kind words to my students. Always the biggest cheerleader and careful to make every single person so individual. So I really appreciate that. And I know my students do as well. And if anyone listening here needs one-on-one help, we are here to help you. You can find me at Dr. Katie at letsgetyouintovetschool.com. If you have any burning questions you'd like me to address here on this podcast, let me know through the same email. I'm going to link Brenna's newsletter below because I strongly recommend everyone read it and sign up, get a little happy, a little calm from it. I guess that's all. Thank y'all so much for listening. Just know that getting started, whether it's on your essay or your application, getting started is the hardest part. And Brenna, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie. This was great.